This video is brought to you by DICE, the global entertainment content marketplace.
There aren't many things that are certain in life, as each day holds mysteries, paths, and events that we can't access with precognition. Instead, we have to traverse the life that we're given with blind hope and courage. There is one thing that is certain in life though, and that is death. And whilst that may seem like a very morbid introduction to a video, it is important to discuss the topic that this video is going to centre itself around, as we explore a movie that guides us through the stages of grief, a term coined by Kubler-Ross, and how we move forward when standing in the face of death itself. To the Unknown God is that film. It's a film that depicts heartache, anger, denial, and acceptance through grief in the most realistic way possible. Hi. My name's James, and today we'll be exploring the meaning and the beauty behind To the Unknown God. But before we dive into this video, if you're a buyer looking to acquire To the Unknown God, or you're a seller looking to get your content out to a global audience, you can get in touch with us through our website, connect.digital, or you can email us at diesales@connectdigital.com. Spoiler alert, we will be covering major plot points in the film. But without further ado, let's get into To the Unknown God. To the Unknown God begins with one of our primary characters, Lucia, who's played by Laura Pellicciari, putting together a birthday cake. We do not know who this cake is for quite yet, but the mood of the scene is laced with a feeling of sadness, which is quite polarising for a seemingly happy event. This tension is exacerbated when our son, Gabriel, walks into the room, immediately leaving with disgust upon looking at the cake. Immediately, we are thrown into a growing hostility within the family dynamic with no context to begin with, which I think really ramps up the tension that's felt when watching this movie. Lucia then buries the cake in the garden, hinting towards a tribute to a lost family member. We then shortly see Lucia go to work, where we find that she's a carer for individuals that are reaching the end of their life. The mood is often quiet, with little talking being done, with an air of tension engulfing the scene. Throughout these opening scenes, you can really sense pain within Lucia. As though she makes friendly conversation with her patients and co-workers, she often seems vacant, with smiles feeling quite forced. Later, we see some establishing shots of the house that Lucia and Gabriel reside in. Lucia prepares dinner and then sits and waits for Gabriel to come home. Minutes pass, then hours, until the sun fades into the night sky. Gabriel returns, completely ignoring Lucia. The hostility and resentment projected from Gabriel is palpable. Something has happened, something bad enough to break them apart, to fill Gabriel with permanent disdain towards his own mother. Lucia goes to church and soon finds herself opening up to another woman about her loss and grief. This is where we learn that the person that Lucia is mourning is the death of her own daughter, who passed away 8 years ago from a terminal illness. This scene is gut-wrenching, as we see Lucia slowly fall apart. As she recounts the events that transpired before her daughter's death, she cries, feeling guilt at the fact that there was nothing she could have done to save her child. We can see all of Lucia's bottled up emotions fly out here, as she has no one else to talk to about her troubles. Her husband left her after her daughter's passing, her son resents her, and she can't burden the clients that she works with, leaving her feeling trapped within her own mind every single day. We see Lucia continue on with her job, helping the elderly, listening to their life stories and current affairs. We can see that she's really genuinely attentive and really cares for her patients. Meanwhile, we come to learn that Gabriel has taken up an extreme sport as a hobby, which entails traversing dangerous landscapes with his mountain bike. Immediately, we get the sense that this is some form of rebellion for Gabriel, taking up hobbies that he knows his mother would not approve of. The tension between Gabriel and Lucia only intensifies when she comes home to find Gabriel's bike in tatters, hanging from the ceiling of his bedroom. This proves the earlier point about Gabriel's rebellion in undertaking such a dangerous sport. Lucia just loses her patience with him, but he seems completely unfazed, choosing to walk away from her rather than engaging within an argument. At work, Lucia meets a new patient, Giulio Radetti, a former professor who's been admitted to the home as he has a terminal illness and needs constant care. The two immediately form a connection. As the movie goes on, we can see this bond strengthen, as he tells Lucia about his varied life experiences, why he chose to not get treated for his cancer, alongside other life questions that begin to make Lucia reflect on her own life. You can see her begin to process her grief and why she chooses to live in the cell of guilt that she created for herself after her daughter passed. One scene I want to point out, though not entirely important to the plot, is when Mario and Julia have an on-foot race down the hallway. This scene is extremely wholesome and quite funny, breaking up the pace of a very serious and often quite emotionally dark film. but in a way that's subtle and doesn't feel forced into the film. It flows very naturally and kind of matches with what you expect from Giulio and Mario. Another scene that's very important to the film is one in which we see Giulio and Mario playing a game of chess together. Whilst at first glance this scene may seem uneventful, the game of chess serves as a metaphor for the way in which we choose to live life, which is the basis of the film itself. Life is about taking risks. We must move forward if we are to progress. The risks we take may involve losing or failing, but that's a better fate than to stay trapped in the same position. Even if one is to stay in place, eventually they'll still fail, so really it's healthier to move, even if you don't know where that moving will lead you to. Whilst Lucia's progression takes place, Gabriel is trying to find a way to get a hold of a new bike to continue his dangerous hobby. He asks his friend if he can borrow his bike to perform an incredibly dangerous stunt that, if performed wrong, could seriously endanger Gabriel's life. But after seeing what happened to Gabriel's own bike, he rightly refuses. You can see here that Gabriel's friend is genuinely quite concerned for him, as he feels like Gabriel might be taking this sport a little bit too far. Eventually, the friend caves in, giving Gabriel his bike. Gabriel then films this incredibly dangerous stunt through his GoPro, which is then uploaded to the internet. Lucia sees this, breaking down as she feels like she has completely lost control over her son, whilst he dances with death, living a life of reckless abandon. Lucia's last hope is to call her ex-husband, hoping that somehow he can help set Gabriel straight before something bad happens to him. Meanwhile, Gabriel is in class and finds himself in a debate with his religious studies teacher. Gabriel finds himself questioning why he must suffer in order to love, or to find happiness. The teacher begins to debate him on the topic, but Gabriel shuts him out, clearly having disdain for him. Here we can see how much Gabriel is hurting, and how alone he feels. The teacher nor the students really truly understand Gabriel, his grief, his pain, or his suffering. He feels isolated, much like Lucia, and has no one to turn to. His sadness is projected onto the world through anger and resentment, as he desperately tries to hold it together with his facade. But in scenes such as this one, we kind of start to see the cracks forming in Gabriel's facade. We find Lucia again with Giulio at work. Giulio begins to open up to her about his illness, the severity of the various treatments that the doctors offered him in order to neutralize the disease. Lucia asks him why he refused to be treated, and he responds by saying the desire for a cure can destroy life. Whilst Giulio could have been treated, he didn't want to go through the ache of having radiation therapy, chemo, operations, and much more, all without certainty of survival. His reasoning being that the treatment would wear him down anyway, and would strip away what freedom of life that he had left. To him, that was a fate worse than death. Later on, we see Lucia's ex-husband appear with his sister for dinner at Lucia's house. Whilst they feign amicability, the tension in the room is soaring. Klaus tries to understand Gabriel's lifestyle, what he gets out of this dangerous sport that he partakes in, to which Gabriel explains the mental preparation and safety procedures that he undertakes before each stunt. Here we can get a sense of Gabriel's intelligence. It doesn't feel entirely as though his love for this sport is of reckless abandon or rebellion. He is calculated, cohesive, and understands what it is that he's doing. Despite this, Klaus is still hesitant about this. He tries to mediate the tension between Lucia and Gabriel, but Gabriel constantly bites back, stating that his parents live mentally paralyzed and that he refuses to live the way that they do. Lucia begins to feel close to Gabriel for the first time, recognizing that he is strong enough to follow his own viewpoint on life. We jump forward to another conversation between Lucia and Giulio, where Giulio tells a story of how he almost had his leg amputated when he was younger due to a severe wound. He almost accepted his fate, but his mother refused to let him go through with the amputation. Miraculously, the leg healed with no permanent damage. Lucia takes on board what Giulio means with this story, that the cost of living freely must involve the risk and certainty of death. At times, focusing on health optimization strips a person of their agency, freedom, and experience of life itself, which can be equally as devastating. Parallel to this, Gabriel begins to confront his pain. We see him go to the hospital where his sister passed 8 years ago, whom he wasn't able to visit at the time because his parents felt that he was too young and wanted to protect him from the grief. He asks a nurse if he could see the room she resided in for her final days. Following this, we see him hike up to the trail he biked through earlier in the film, but we see a sense of resolve on his face as he climbs through the hills. He begins his grieving process after all of these years, sitting alone on a mountain in his own company. As we reach the climax of the film, we see that Giulio accepts his last day of life. Content with how he lived his life, he passes away with Lucia in his arms, who begins to wonder if she has been too cruel to herself during this grieving process, and if she can find a way to move on with her life before it's too late. To the Unknown God is not by any means an easy watch. as it captures the raw process of grief in the present. The genius of this film lies in its refusal to conform to typical Western Hollywood movie tropes. We can see this immediately in the film, where we are thrown into the lives of a family that's still grieving. We are given no flashbacks to the happy family or cutaways. All we know is shown through what the characters choose to tell us and what little pictures there are of their old life. Furthermore, the film's closing section follows this same approach, as we see no happily ever after for anyone involved. There is no peaceful resolution, no Hollywood ending, just a family trying to move on with their lives. Don't mistake this for a lack of linear progression though, as we see the characters clearly go through trigger events that begin a healing process for them. For example, toward the end of the film, Gabriel buries his broken bike in the garden. Before, it was hung in his room. This can be seen as a metaphor for Gabriel choosing to let go of the past, rather than have the clouds of his trauma hang over him. Lucia also makes notable changes too. Though more subtle, Lucia learned a lot through meeting Giulio, and she begins to question her grieving process, who she is, and how she wants to live out the rest of her days before her life ends. Furthermore, we see her begin to give Gabriel space in his own grieving process, rather than trying to control his actions and confine him into a safe haven, as she sees that this is a reflection of her own fears about losing him too. Whilst the movie's climax may feel like there's no resolution, there is one. It's just not what we usually see in film and TV. It reflects real life. This is what it's really like to mourn loss. It isn't simple, it isn't linear, it's painful, dark, and tragic. But there's always hope. The soundtrack of this movie is created by prolific musician Sanko Namchalak. It lies relatively dormant in the film, only making a crescendo appearance in select scenes within the movie. Instead, the movie makes use of natural sounds in an attempt to give the movie a more realistic feel. With that being said, the score to this movie is nothing short of amazing. The music, using intense percussion sounds layered with soaring vocal melodies, make the respective scenes feel really intense. The music never makes an appearance in spoken conversation, as to not take away from the focus of the conversation. When the soundtrack does appear, we see that the characters are never speaking over it. The absence of conversation draws more attention to the important visual details of the movie, as well as the score. This is brilliantly executed, as the movie is subtly telling you where to put your focus without being too on the nose. In conclusion, To the Unknown God is a film that aims to simulate life, to give you a snapshot into the world of a grieving family. The film offers no budding romances, Hollywood story arcs, or action-packed scenes. This film shows you, in the truest form, what it's really like to grieve. What do you think of this video? Let us know down in the comments below. Furthermore, you can check out my interview with Laura Pellicciari of Kineo Film in the link in the description below. As always, you can get in touch with us through our website, connect.digital, or you can email us at diesales@connectdigital.com for business inquiries. Be sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. Have a great day.